No. It's fine. Yes. Okay.
Ah, c'est génial, c'est hyper.
Sure. On leur donne ce qu'ils veulent. C'est fait.
What is, do you hear me? Really? Good. What is economic inequality? That is what many people think that it's a price we must pay for innovation. And this is what we are going to talk about here, because we can feel a gap today with the new technologies between poor people and new billionaires that we can find everywhere. And the question is now, is this the unavoidable cost for innovative economy, or is innovation, on the other hand, the only way to reduce inequalities while addressing global major issues? We are delighted to welcome here one of the greatest advocates of in innovation for equality, who believe that innovation can help to reduce inequality either in the face for the climate crisis and the transition of a smoke-free world. Please welcome Gregoire Verdeaux, who's the Senior Vice President of External Affairs of Philip Morris International. It's a very nice title.
It's a very long one. Yeah.
It's a long one, yes, for a visit card. Gregoire, tell me, your past experience in the transition world can make you talk about this innovation equality. What does that mean?
So first of all, I need to apologize because I usually don't sound like Don Corleone in The Godfather.
It's more true.
Which is not necessarily the character you associate to innovation, or not the really right one. And indeed, thank you for, it's a good expression, the transition world.
Yes.
And that sort of brings a couple of things to mind. So I joined Philip Morris International a little less than 2 years ago, and I had a career about 16 years in government, in France, European Commission, the UN. And then I joined actually 2 other sectors. The energy sector, at the time where you had really the transition towards renewable, that stopped to be something that was like, I would say, a fantasy for scientists, but something that reached a certain scale on the energy market around the world. And then I worked in the telecom and digital sector for 6 years, at the time of 5G and fiber. And interestingly, of course, here, tobacco and nicotine industry, but due to the transformation of Philip Morris, which is, frankly speaking, with BP, without a doubt, the biggest transformation, business transformation of the Fortune 500, I see a lot of similarities. And the couple of thoughts that I would like to share to kick off is that we love innovation. Okay, raise your hand, who is against it? No one. But we have, and that's the lesson learned from the past decade, we have vastly underestimated the fact that it can generate inequality. And by this I mean that there is a phenomenon that, due to the fact that innovation is actually going at a very rapid pace in different sectors, whether you talk to biotechnologies and pharmaceutical, to, of course, digital and network industries, to the energy sector, to transportation mobility, to our sector of consumer and consumer products. We don't take into account the fact that you have an aggregated effect of innovation for those who benefit from it and exclusion for those who don't. And I'm surprised to see that no one is ever looking really behind the most impactful social phenomenon of the past years, in particular populist voting, with to the fact that the people that sometimes express a dissatisfaction, a rebellion, a feeling of despair, are actually excluded from every layer of innovation we talk about. And at the end of the day, if you look at who are the early adopters, and we know how innovation works, from early adopters to trendsetters, and then reaching a certain scale, that is, for an industry, what is paying back the cost of consumer acquisition. And then it stops there. And some people are left behind. And in the country I know best, you know well, France, the Gilets jaunes was a revolt, a rebellion about the price of gas, because these people, they had to drive every day in the countryside, micro-mobility, clean energy, 5G, fiber, none of those things were for them. So that's the first thought, which we don't take this into account, the aggregated impact on the same population of different layers of innovation, benefiting one part, and frankly, always the same, and not the other. And at the end of the day, you end up gardening, looking at your garden and watering always the same flowers. And then the other thought, obviously, is the notion of normalcy, is that this innovation doesn't happen at any point in time. Normalcy, it's interesting, we express this nostalgia, particularly as a business, we love visibility, predictability, all these things. And I surprise myself thinking like I'm like some old husband that has been left by my wife a long time ago, and I'm still hoping she will come back someday. But it's been 15 years. Lehman Brothers, in this country, the longest recession of the OECD, the Syrian war that had a massive refugee crisis impact in this region beyond. Then we had COVID. Now we have a war in Ukraine. And I think it's high time that we consider that there is no such thing as normalcy, and that the sort of combination of emergency and resilience, which frankly has been the way governments, because it all ends up with government, people say do something. Governments are actually using as the new normal tools of regulation and design that were not designed for this. And I think we should talk to them and help to improve that situation.
You were talking about the yellow jacket, but also this COVID, the pandemic. We have the impression that people return to those, very negative zone effects that they had, those habits that they had that were negative for them during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic, I think it's in plain sight, has actually increased the inequality in the developed and the emerging world, with different consequences and characteristics in both. But what really struck me is the fact that some problems have been identified very early on by governments. And once again, they did what they had to do. And then some have been completely ignored. And
examples?
Well, frankly, how many days did it take to a combination of governments and companies to figure out how you could work remotely? Very quickly, when you think about it, and we all read this report about the tech explosion, okay, the fact that the remote work, smart work, everything has changed, which, by the way, once again, benefits or affects differently. Huh?
Yes,
if you are an engineer and you can work from home, it's different if you are actually a so-called first-line worker in a supermarket or in a hospital. Huh? But let's leave it at that. The governments really understood the potential of a digitalization of the economy, embraced it and addressed it. Frankly speaking, who came up with a good plan with the idea that by confining people, they would eat more junk, drink a lot more, potentially overall exercise less, and develop mental health issues? Not really, because for some reason that has been underestimated. And I think this is also the role of a company like ours, where the people we know best are the consumers, to contribute to a solution, and the solution starts with the awareness that there was a problem. This problem is there, but we had the example in our industry. There were some, I would say, rather unhelpful message in a country I will not name because I'm charitable, by the Ministry of Health, that, e-cigarettes that can be, with COVID, we don't know. Result is people went back to cigarettes.
So they're back to this negative comfort zone.
Yeah, because you need governments to be proactively positive.
So you think that's a political issue?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay, but what are the elements that it can help build bridges in a polarized society like that? So,
if we go back to understanding that if you let innovation be driven by a great man, that is Adam Smith, so the invisible hand of the market, he will drive innovation a little bit always to the same line, and you will end up with a group of consumers that is almost always the same. So that's where the organic development of innovation ends to a degree.
Yes.
What we're talking about here is a policy-supported innovation, which is where you actually, enter into a dialogue with the industry, because at the end of the day, it's the industry driving innovation. But we all know the virtues of good public-private partnership to actually look at how it can be driven further. And here you have to address a number of issues. Awareness of the consumer, because, I took the example of digital, which I know well from the past. Digital literacy is not something that you get in one day of training. So there is digital literacy and ergonomy. So awareness, but that applies to our sector, to many others. Affordability. The acceptability also culturally by the population, which is not necessarily very easy either. I mean, okay, let's call a cat a cat. There's a bit of backlash against windmills in Europe. Huh? Okay, so that's acceptability in layman's language. So this is a complex framework that should be and can be a sort of joint work to be established by governments and the various industrial sectors.
Okay, before going back to those policymakers, can you explain what is this Philip Morris International smoke-free vision?
Yes, so why is this relevant to us? Well, because frankly, we are, in a few sentences, but we are driving the innovation and the change in the sector here, because we took a product that is really quite traditional and well known also in its effects, which is the cigarette. And we decided resolutely, investing billions of R&D in this, to propose to smokers better alternatives. And these alternatives that have evolved over time are each step is actually more technological than the next. But this is also driven not only by consumer recognition, but also by the recognition of regulators, because we have undertaken, I'm smiling because these are such monumental work to put something in front of the FDA in the US, but we have submitted our heated tobacco products to the scrutiny of the Food and Drug Agency in the US. And the FDA has acknowledged, after considering the evidence, that these products are indeed presenting a massively reduced exposure to the toxic elements that you find in combusting cigarettes. So that's what, in a few words, we are the leader in smoke-free products. And that's the name of innovation in our sector, is coming from products that you combust with the effects that are well known to products that do not combust and are now clearly identified as resolutely less harmful.
So if I understand well, a manufacturer of cigarette is now moving to innovation with alternative cigarettes, so made way too small. Oh, for me in PMI, yes.
We hope, I mean, the industry is,
yes.
The rest of the industry is following.
Do you have the Greek example, maybe?
Yeah, the Greek example is really a fantastic example, because in Greece there has been a sort of reality check that the traditional pillars of what is the policy of tobacco control, which is you try to prevent people to smoke. If they start smoking, you encourage them to stop, and you tax the thing. That these three pillars were not producing the effect of massively eroding, decreasing the smoking prevalence. So there is actually a fourth pillar, which is called harm reduction, which means if none of the three steps before work, then it's better to offer less harmful alternatives to adult smokers. And this is where the Greek government has decided to look at the reality and take the right steps, and the market penetration of these smoke-free products is quite remarkable already. This is happening in other places in the world. We see this developing in New Zealand, in the Philippines. The United Kingdom, I think, is really an interesting phenomenon, because if we go back to inequality, the UK and France had the same smoking prevalence, around 30%, about 15 years ago. France has decreased by like 5 points, and the UK by 20.
Oh.
Yeah. And the answer is the UK has taken, by the way, a different route that heated tobacco, which is electronic cigarettes. Electronic cigarettes are also smoke-free, so they absolutely qualify to be less harmful, provided that they are used correctly. It's a different debate. And that has produced this massive effect. But then look at the regional data in the UK. This is a London thing.
Oh, just the capital.
Yeah, you go to the Midlands, to Northern England, and you see that this national average is here in the south and there in the north. And here we go back to the issues of not only affordability, because it's very expensive to buy a pack of cigarettes in the UK. It's the most expensive pack of cigarettes in Europe, okay? I was about to say the EU, in Europe. 12 pounds. But, so it's not an issue of price and affordability, it's also an issue of culture, of awareness, of education, and this is where governments have a role to play. And just to finish on the UK, I found quite remarkable, you know, everything has a political angle that has a particular flavor, that a conservative government like the government of Boris Johnson has actually decided in November to propose that e-cigarettes could be proposed through the National Health Service, so the British Social Security System, as tools of replacement of cigarettes, and deliberately, clearly targeting population in Midlands and Northern England.
So you think that the policymakers should do something to encourage economic and social challenges?
Absolutely, definitely.
How?
Well,
We have just 2 minutes.
Just 2 minutes, but really, first of all, the first step is to understand that innovation will not naturally produce equality. On the contrary, due to the openness and the various profiles in the population, it will be absorbed and leveraged easier and better by a certain group in the population. And these days, it's always the same group.
Yeah.
And understanding that is critical, because then you can have policies in place that are targeted, because you don't need to have blanket policies. You can have targeted policies that are also, and I have to conclude on this, consumer-based, I would say humanly based. And I discussed the matter with a doctor not a long time ago, a prominent researcher. You know, they're always a bit careful to talk to the tobacco industry, but at the same time, a lot of them recognize that we are trying very hard. And he was telling me, you know, at the end of the day, when I meet a patient, it's not about what he should do, it's about what he can do.
Gregoire Verdeaux, thank you very much. It was very interesting to speak with a representative of a traditional manufacturer who used to produce cigarettes, but that moving through innovation and technology to go away from the cigarette.
Thank you.
On se serre la main.